The views expressed on Science for the People are not necessarily the views of this station, its affiliates, sponsors, or advertisers.
This week on Science for the People, we'll be talking about brain injuries from two very different perspectives. A little later on, Rochelle Saunders will be speaking with Adrian Owen about detecting awareness in patients in a vegetative state. But first, we'll be talking about how sometimes a traumatic brain injury can lead to some extremely uncommon side effects. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Science for the People. I'm Desiree Schell. I have two guests with me today, Jason Padgett and Maureen Seaberg. They are the co-authors of the new book, Struck by Genius: How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel. Now, Jason Padgett is an aspiring number theorist and mathematician with acquired savant syndrome and synesthesia. He draws the grids and fractals he sees synesthetically. He's currently the manager of 3 futon stores in Tacoma, Washington. Very good to have you here, Jason.
Thank you very much.
And Maureen Seaberg is a New York author with several forms of synesthesia and is an expert synesthesia blogger for Psychology Today. Previous to Struck by Genius, she wrote the book Tasting the Universe: People Who See Colors in Words and Rainbows in Symphonies. Thanks for being here, Maureen.
Thank you.
Now, Jason, to start off, take me through what happened on September 13th in 2002.
My friend Angela, she was on a first date with this guy at a little karaoke bar, and they had some drinks, and they called me and wanted me to drive. So I drove over to this little karaoke bar that was pretty close to where I lived, in a real rough area at the time, and wound up singing a song, having a Coke, and then leaving. And as we left, there was 2 guys that were singing karaoke in there, and they left behind us. And I didn't see it coming, but they attacked me from behind. Angela saw it, and she said they actually were at a run, came behind me. And from my perspective, all I saw was a flash of light, and I felt this thud. And it's like just what boxers, I think, talk about when they say you get that flash knockdown. It was like literally like a flash bulb went poof, and the next thing I knew, I was on my knees just getting pummeled and trying to figure out where I was, what was happening, why I was being attacked. And I remember thinking, actually, I was being attacked by a gang of people, and then having this intense feeling of overwhelming dread that I'm going to die right now, and getting that fight or flight instinct. And surprisingly, it was fight that came on. And I remember having this thought of I wanted to hurt one before I died. And I grabbed one of the guy's legs, and I bit him on the inside of his leg, and pulled him down to the ground. And then his friend just started kicking me in the back and the head repeatedly. And this we've been fighting now for probably about 30 seconds to 40 seconds, and until finally the guy that was kicking me said, "Give me your goddamn jacket." And I literally rolled off his friend, tossed my jacket off, which at that point was already torn up. It was a little cheap Wilson's, leather jacket, $99 jacket. And they grabbed it and ran away. And I ran back into this karaoke bar, and I'm bleeding, and people had seen this happen, and nobody called 911 or did anything. And I ran back in there, and I said that the guys were singing karaoke there, and that their names were on the karaoke slips, and that their fingerprints were on the dishes, and their dishes were still on the table. And the girl that worked there said, if you want the dishes and their names from those slips, go look in the garbage cans. And then told me, and I wouldn't let me use the phone to call 911 or anything, and then made me leave. And it's a longer story, but it turns out that they were dating the guys that attacked me, and at that point they were trying to protect the guys from getting in trouble. But we did wind up catching them.
Now, while this would have just been sort of a passing moment in people's lives, this changed everything for you. How did you change after the mugging?
Yeah, after this happened, everything when it moves, like imagine things having a slightly pixelated quality and being, the best way I can think of to describe it is like individual picture frames. You know those old flip books that you can draw a picture and you flip through it and you see the little character move? It's like that, but just not so dramatic. It's just enough to give everything this pixelated, slightly pixelated look, and everything is most definitely like grid-like. Everything that has a curve is no longer like perfectly curved. It has like little tiny straight like tangent or secant lines around the edge. So the smoothness is gone from everything because of this picture-like quality, and it's there permanently.
Now, it's not just your vision that changed, your behavior changed as well.
Absolutely. That was the toughest thing. Since everything looked so different, it was very difficult just to deal with it. It was very disorientating for months. And I had extreme OCD that came with it also. Like before, I would, drop food on the floor, pick it up, eat it, no problem. Open doors, and I literally couldn't open doors. I was Lysoling my money and then putting it in the microwave, repeatedly washing my hands, not being able to. I remember being at school when I finally did go back to school for math, and not being able to get to classes if the little handicap button was broken because I couldn't, get the doors open without touching them. There was a lot of difficulties that came with it, especially the OCD. And now I have the artificial disc in my neck, so I have some other physical problems too. But the worst part, though, when it comes to that kind of thing, was the OCD. OCD was terrible, and eventually I had to get help with it just to where I could get out of my house, because I hold up. I've had I think post-traumatic stress from the attack. I just didn't ever want to be in public, and if I wanted to have my back to the wall, where I could see everybody, because when I was attacked, you feel safe like when you're out in public and there's people everywhere, and you think there's something like that couldn't happen, and then it does, and then nobody helps, and it makes the world seem like a much more dangerous place, especially right after that happened. And so I holed up in my house basically for almost 3.5 years. I left to get groceries only, and I would leave only when I was out of everything, and I absolutely had to leave the house. I had rugs and towels and blankets stapled over the windows. Not any beam of light came in that house. In fact, when I finally did get out and went to the doctor after being in the house for so long, I had a massive vitamin D deficiency because of lack of sunlight for such a long amount of time.
Well, just for comparison's sake, because this is brutal, but what were you like before?
Before, I wasn't mean or anything, but I would say shallow for sure. All I did was goof off, go to bars, party, chase girls. Life was definitely fun, but it was very shallow, and that was pretty much the extent of it. Going out with my bar buddies, drinking, and that was it. That was life, and for years, that's what I did, basically from 16 till almost that point, that was life. So I just goofed off, and that was it.
So you had a complete change in personality, and then you add these, I guess for lack of a better term, visions in a lot of ways. Now, when did you develop an interest in math? Because you were locked in your house, not understanding exactly what the changes you were going through were.
Well, the biggest thing that's, imagine if you see something moving in front of you, and I'm going to exaggerate it just so it's easier to picture. So imagine you see a car moving in front of you, and you see one picture, like a movie. You're watching a movie, with picture frames, and then you see the next picture frame, and the car has moved like a foot. And what I started, since everything had this jittery look to it that just seemed so grid-like, I started mentally overlaying like a piece of graph paper on the top of everything that I was looking at, and found that it was really easy to do. And then I found as long as I made the grid sufficiently fine, that everything across my field of vision would line up with a vertex point on this mental graph. And as I found out later on, it turns out, that's what one of the things that calculus is cutting things up into these integrals, and the smaller and finer those integrals become, the more accurate the measurement gets. So when you're forced to see things as discrete picture frames, that's whole multiples of something, not an infinite number of pictures, it automatically is forcing you to see in a grid structure, which is what math is. That's what's so beautiful about it. Same thing.
This is Science for the People, and I'm talking with Jason Padgett and Maureen Seaberg, the authors of Struck by Genius: How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel. So at what point do you realize that there might be something happening to you over and above a traumatic brain injury? Because all these things taken together are intense.
Yeah, I knew right away. I mean, at first I thought it was the pain medicine. The next day, without question, I knew something was completely different. I didn't know it was going to be forever, but it was scary. But at the same time, it's so pretty. I mean, imagine like clouds, especially anything that spirals. It's so beautiful to see it because it really makes how things are made of these little triangles stand out. In other words, like everything that has a curve, instead of having this curve, just has this little tiny edge to it. And it shows, and how long those edges are, how far apart the picture frames are, to describe like velocity and acceleration and all sorts of wonderful things. But they do it in a perfectly geometric way. And so once I started noticing that it was a grid structure, I mean, I knew there was something mathematical to it, but at the same time, I didn't know how to describe it in mathematical terms. Like I would always just say, that looks like pieces of pie. And at the time, I was just describing triangles, different triangles. As you draw the number pi, which is basically, squaring a circle, you continue to square it, you're making all these different types of triangles. So as you draw it, there's just basically an infinite number of triangles of all different sizes. And so everything that I would see, I was like, wow, if we drew pi this way and that way, I could take that picture and slice it up and build it with pi. And no matter what it was, I found as long as I drew it a certain way, you can break it up into pieces of pi and describe it geometrically.
So now most people that have traumatic brain injuries do not see these kind of things. They do not start to think about the world in terms of math. So how did you research what might be going on with you?
I did a lot of research on the internet. Well, one of the things, like when it came to like a breakthrough on like what pi was and how it all really came together, that this truly was something that is real and you really can describe just about everything with it. I was at home and I'd been thinking about this and going over all of this geometric information in my brain, but I still didn't have the right language to describe it. And my daughter was watching television and a commercial for Overstock.com came on, and she asked me how the TV worked. And I said, little, rectangle or square pixels change color, and as they change color, that changes the picture. And she goes, but how can that be? Because there was a big circle from Overstock.com. And she goes, how do you make a circle with triangles, or rectangles? Because, a square or rectangle is two triangles when you cut it corner to corner. And it was just like there was a window right there, and I was like, you can't. You just make those squares or those triangles smaller to infinity, but you never actually get a perfect circle because perfect circles don't exist, literally. Because to have a perfect circle, you have to have an infinite number of sides or edges, and you can't observe infinity or even count to infinity.
Now, did at any point you think that maybe you were having delusions or hallucinations instead of...
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, totally. I actually remember thinking that. I was like, what? You see these crazy people and they're talking to themselves. And I remember thinking, when you see people like that, you're like, wow, they don't know they're crazy. And I remember thinking, am I that guy who thinks I'm seeing pi everywhere? And I'm not, and I'm the only one who sees this, and this is, something that's not real and just in my brain. There was definitely a lot of doubts when it came to that, because even though it felt absolutely sure, I remember thinking, well, those people are absolutely sure too. And that was one of the great things about going back to school, is going back to school and learning how to do traditional math, which I eventually met a physicist who talked me into going back to school. And I took my very first, Algebra 99 class, and they graphed, a line, just a linear equation. And I remember asking the teacher and saying, you mean every one of these equations is describing geometry? And she said, yes. And I'm like, well, then we are talking about the same thing. We're just doing it two different ways. I'm talking about it in the pure geometry, but you're just talking about equations that are describing the pure geometry. And so traditional math is fantastic because it can prove these things. Whereas like when I draw pi, it certainly looks like it could be right and it sounds good, but how could I prove it? And I couldn't. So of course, once I went back to school, once I hit trig, I was able to prove that what I was drawing was what I said it was.
When was it confirmed that you had not only traumatic brain injury, but also acquired savant syndrome and synesthesia? Now, that was actually with the help of Maureen, correct?
Yeah. Do you want to answer it, Maureen? Or?
Yeah, sure.
All right,
Well, Jason and I met, and we thought it would be a good idea to have his brain looked at because he had not had access to the proper testing before. And I was about to moderate a conference panel on synesthesia in Stockholm, and one of our colleagues there was able to test Jason in nearby Helsinki. And I very much wanted Jason to make his debut at this conference and talk about his case. And he was a real trooper and decided he would do it and go on to the testing. So this is a real odyssey we have been on together, as you can tell. And he was tested by a team of neuroscientists who determined that indeed what he actually, in a very genius way, kind of figured it out on his own through the internet and through watching documentaries on Daniel Tammet. Mm-hmm. But the doctors did indeed see what they needed to see to confirm the savant syndrome and the synesthesia in the brain scans.
Now, maybe clarify for me, Maureen. Now, you have synesthesia as well.
Yes, I do.
What do you see compared to what Jason sees?
Well, it's very similar in that it's involuntary and it's beautiful and you can't shut it off even when you want to. But the difference, there are two differences and two main differences. I was born with mine. So for me, it's not overwhelming, it's not upsetting, it's not overstimulating. I don't know what life is like without it. Mm-hmm. So it's very normal for me. Secondly, the photisms I see, and photisms are things seen in response to stimuli in synesthesia. So if I'm listening to music, say, I always use the example because it's my favorite, say Yo-Yo Ma on the cello, I see these wavy lines, not even lines, forms really, that are glossy and like Christmas peppermints. They kind of roll, it's wave upon wave, all smushed together, like a piece of candy. And so these photisms I have are complex and very specific to me, just the way Jason's are. But my shapes are much more amorphous and much simpler, and in my case, always associated with color. Whereas Jason's are enormous and really crystalline and complex. And when I saw his video for the first time, he had uploaded a video of himself drawing what he sees onto YouTube, which is how we met, how I reached out to him. I thought it was synesthesia on steroids. I had never seen anything like it. And I am very active in the synesthesia community, so I know what a lot of other people see besides me.
You're listening to Science for the People, and we'll be back with Maureen Seaberg and Jason Padgett, the authors of Struck by Genius, after this.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show exploring everyday life from a scientific perspective. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, or to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. I'm talking with Jason Padgett, who has acquired savant syndrome and synesthesia, and Maureen Seaberg, writer and synesthete. We're talking about their book, Struck by Genius, How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel. Okay, so I know a lot of our listeners are really wanting to dig into the science around this. So, can you, let's define some terms here. Now, you are, Jason, an acquired savant, and you have acquired savant syndrome. So what is that, first of all?
Acquired savant syndrome is where you excel in one area, but it's very specific. A lot of times people, it's kind of a derogatory term, but you hear people use the phrase idiot savant. But what they're really saying is basically like you're normal or below normal in everything, but in one tiny, very specific area you excel. And the acquired part means that I acquired it after birth. I wasn't born with it. Like Daniel Tammet they believe he acquired it from seizures that he had as a child. In most cases,
Daniel Tammet?
He memorized pi to like 25,000 decimals. He learned Finnish in like a week. He's been on a lot of shows on the Science Channel, things like that. He has synesthesia. In fact, I was watching a show on him when it hit me that, wow, this is something that's real. I remember actually running around the house and being all excited because how we were talking about how I doubted, because I, at the time, didn't know that this was something that existed, that people could see colors or taste what they hear, things like that. I didn't know about synesthesia. And when I saw that show, it was actually a relief to me to know this was something that was out there. Anyway, he has acquired savant syndrome, but in most cases people are born with it, and in most cases they're autistic. So that's one of the reasons why they're interested in talking to me and Daniel Tammet about it, is because we're able to describe what we're seeing, whereas there's people that have autism that it's in very extreme, and they can't describe what they're seeing, yet you can hold the number up and they can instantly tell you whether it's prime or not, but they can't tell you how they're doing it, but they're always right. It's absolutely amazing things, but the difference again being that I can describe what I'm seeing.
So how rare is acquired savant syndrome?
Apparently, I'm one of 40 people, about 40 people in the world that have acquired savant syndrome. Although I think it may be higher, it could be double that, or triple that, who knows? But they're just undiagnosed. Because I went on for years, I didn't have any, insurance, had no way to get any testing done, and at the same time was, doubting myself at times too. So the fact that I was able to get testing done was fantastic and relieving, and helped me get on track, into the world of synesthesia, so I could talk to scientists who are studying it. I can also go back to school and talk to real scientists and mathematicians, about what I'm seeing, how I'm describing things. Does this match up with how they describe, reality? If I'm seeing it this way and it's describing velocity and acceleration, then it's got to work, both ways. It can't just work geometrically and then not in equations, or else it's just not true. But what's so amazing is that they're both the exact same thing, and everything that if I draw it, or if I use the way these picture frames change to describe velocity and acceleration, it turns out it's identical to what we do in math and physics. It's just doing it in pure geometric form.
You at all interested in math before the mugging?
No, I hated it. I was one of those kids. I still can't believe it. I would say, when are you going to use that? How does that apply in the real world? Oh, man. And I remember saying it like condescendingly. And I look at it now, and there is literally nothing that you can't describe with it.
Okay, now let's talk about the diagnosis itself. Now, how did they test for this? How did they prove that you have acquired savant syndrome?
Yeah, what they do is something called a functional MRI. MRIs will map the geography of your brain, so you could see a tumor in there, but it can't say what your brain is doing exactly. A functional MRI, what it does is it shows how much oxygen your brain is using and where. And they're discovering just amazing things about the brain because of these functional MRIs, and they're taking people with all sorts of gifts, from math to English to drawing to music. And so anyway, it puts you in this functional MRI, and say for instance, you start writing with a pencil while you're in the functional MRI. The part of your brain that controls writing is working harder because you're writing. Since it's working harder, it uses more oxygen, and the machine can show where your brain is using more oxygen. person. And since you're doing it while you're writing, they can then say, that part is controlling writing. And so they put me in the functional MRI, and they'll flash hundreds of pictures, and they're just random pictures of all sorts of things. And every once in a while, an equation pops up just fast enough for you to recognize it, and that's it, and then gone, about maybe half a second at the most. And then they watch what happens to your brain. Which part of your brain starts to work hard when you're doing math? And they found that I had conscious access to parts of the brain that we normally don't have conscious access to, and that when I'm doing math, instead of just having the math area of the brain activate, it was the visual cortex along with the mathematics.
And Maureen,
we're working in conjunction.
Maureen, how about synesthesia? How did they diagnose that?
Well, that was a similar thing. They showed Jason formulas, some of which were real formulas and some of which were nonsense formulas. And the ones that were real and the ones that he had an actual response to lit up the areas in the brain that are known to house synesthesia, which primarily are the fusiform and the angular gyrus near the ears. Jason is awake, apparently, in the parietal lobe, and that is why, and we are not, and that is why he is seeing the processes of mathematics.
So, of course, the big question is why? Why does your traumatic brain injury result in acquired savant syndrome versus many other injuries not resulting in much of anything good? There are some theories, are there not?
There are theories about like bursts of neurotransmitters, how your brain can rewire itself when injured, and depending on where it rewires and how it rewires, and the plasticity of the brain, and along with the genetics of each person. There's so many different factors, but I don't know why I got so lucky. I mean, I feel lucky, and there's been times where I felt like it was the worst thing in the world, because I was all alone, holed up in my house, yet at the same time seeing this beautiful universe, but being very, alone and I can't tell you why it's me and not somebody else, or why it's so rare. But I can only say that in most cases, traumatic brain injury is all bad, and I feel very, very lucky to have any good come out of it. And it just turns out, that in my case, the good really, really turned out to be really good, because it is how things work. And since I, at the time, didn't have any technical math skills, the only way I had to describe it was layman terms.
So, Maureen, you wrote about a number of theories for why this could have happened. Do you want to outline some of those?
I tend toward Dr. Daryl Treffert's take on this. He is the world's leading expert on savants. He has had over 300 cases in his 50-year career, and he is the man for the world over to whom you have to travel to really get a good look at this. So Jason and I went to Wisconsin, where he is based, and Jason submitted 2 interviews. And Dr. Treffert actually says that the takeaway from all of this is that we all come with factory-installed software or genetic memory. And I know that sounds far out, but this is the world's leading authority on savant syndrome, a real man of science. And it's as though we ascribe all these abilities that we consider instinct to the animal kingdom. The monarch butterflies who fly to the same 23-acre tract in Mexico year after year, or the way geese fly south, or salmon migrate to spawn. But we are just as remarkable as human beings, and we don't think of ourselves in that context. So what Dr. Treffert believes is Jason's brain sort of went to a default setting when it was badly injured. Now, there are a couple of theories about how that actually works, and one of the leading ones is that a flood of neurotransmitters is released in the brain, and that causes the rewiring. But everything that Jason is able to do now, Dr. Treffert would say, was innate, but was just not available to him previously.
Yeah, I think about it a lot. I just had a daughter, and she's almost 4 months old now. And when we moved her, and she threw her arms out like she was falling, And she was so little at the time, I thought, how could she possibly know to react that way or to try to grab something? And I started thinking the same thing. This is the instinct that is kind of built into you when you're born. And when she felt like she was falling, it was because her position changed rapidly in a short amount of time, so she was understanding, velocity and acceleration, even though it's just on this instinctual, very geometric basis because she felt it, but still they react to it, and they're reacting to an equation, which falling or feeling like you're falling is literally an equation, because geometry and equations, again, are one and the same. So there is some sort, I do agree with him that there is some sort of, instinctual software that we're all born with, and all of it has to be mathematically based. Even when you just listen to how the brain communicates, when it clicks back and forth, that's like a code. And so we're born somehow naturally able to read this code that our brain is doing when it makes all these clicks back and forth. So it's pretty amazing when you think about what we can do when we're born.
Definitely. But so I guess what we're saying is the mechanism by which this happens is still speculation?
Nothing can be proven 100%, There are people that think it's neurotransmitters or just the plasticity of the brain, and it could turn out to be, a combination of them all. But I for sure think we have, like he says, factory installed hardware. Whether or not it's completely that, I don't know. I wish I knew for certain, so I could tell you absolutely, how it works. Because then that is one of the things that they want to learn is exactly how this works, so that they can find ways to induce this. Dr. Treffer and I were just in Scientific American, and they have an implant that they're developing that is going to simulate or actually you'll be able to upgrade your brain and have savant syndrome installed. It's pretty amazing. It's in the July issue of Scientific American. And that's one of the things they're learning. Is there a way to help people who have had traumatic brain injuries or people who are just wanting to get better at math or at music? Is there a way to induce savant syndrome without a brain injury? And it turns out it looks like there is or will be for sure.
Maureen, did you want to add anything?
Yes. In fact, there's a device that's been developed by Dr. Alan Snyder. He's a leading researcher in Australia. It's called the Creativity Cap, and it's a transcranial magnetic stimulator that some of your listeners may know from its popularity in treating depression in current clinical settings. But what he does is he's reworked it so that it stimulates the brain in such a way that one would behave as a savant while wearing it. And he tests people prior to wearing the cap in drawing skills and in multiple choice questions, and then he tests them again, and they score off the chart while they're wearing this electrical device on their heads. So it really is a brave new world in terms of brain research already out there, and it's just going to be a matter of time before it moves from the laboratories into practical use.
And this is such a new field. I hesitate to give people too much hope in this area right now.
Oh, yeah, we're looking at years away. We're looking at, 15 to 20 years. I mean, the implant is being developed, but again, it's going to, I would definitely say it's got to be a decade, or more before it would start to be used. But again, they can read all about it in that issue of Scientific American, and they go into it, and of course, the developers of that have a lot more knowledge about it than I do.
Okay, so what is next for you guys? Because this is a remarkable story, and I think I just read that your story was optioned for film. It was optioned for a film with Channing Tatum, and Sony got the rights, and it's looks like it's going to be a film here in 2 to 3 years with Channing Tatum starring in it, and we're all still kind of in this shock about it. I feel very, very lucky, and for me, I want to use it as this chance to teach people, especially those who are like I was, that think math is silly and they think it doesn't apply, and they think they can't learn it. If I can see the universe differently, geometrically, and see all this and be the way I was, I know other people can too, because I when I draw it now and I show people how it works, like people will come into, I don't work at the stores anymore, but I did work at these futon stores for a long time, and people would come in and I had drawings up all over the wall, and I would use any excuse I could, to bring up math.
and I could see their eyes glaze over, and at least 99% of them, and they would say, oh, math is, I hate it, don't even talk to me about it. But then 2 minutes later, they were totally engrossed because they understood it. Like I would start saying something about the number pi, which I, of course, like talking about. But when I say that, the majority of people, it's like this mystical, magical thing, and they don't understand it. They don't know what it is. They don't know why so many people think it's a big deal, and they don't think they can understand it. And then 2 minutes later, they completely understand it. And even though it's in just geometric terms, they still understand how it works.
Maureen, are you interested in math, first of all? Because what was it like to write this book with Jason?
Well, I am. I'm a Menson myself. I belong to the High IQ Society, but I am not a savant. I am not as off the charts as Jason. So, excuse me, I have aptitude, but I don't have the same set of skills. And Jason was very, very patient and explained things to me multiple times until it started to make sense. And I think where it really clicks and where I recommend your listeners go if they're having trouble visualizing some of this is to the website struckbygenius.com or to the website fineartamerica.com, where much of Jason's art is on display. And of course, pick up our book, which is available in Canada in all stores, all outlets, because we have a nice plate of pictures in the middle of the book showing Jason's art. And where it clicked for me was to see the visual that went along with Jason's very enthusiastic spoken descriptions of this. Like if you see his circle subdivided by triangles up to 720 triangles, you understand what he's saying, that if you hone in on the edge of a circle, not from our perspective and our size, but at a very microscopic, tiny, even quantum scale, there are no smooth curves. Everything is a series of dashes, and it ends up being relative. And Jason makes you, and I think in reading the book people will get this, Jason makes you both zoom in to the tiniest thing that you could possibly consider, and then he takes off like a rocket, and he's got the bird's eye cosmic view of things. And it was a very Alice in Wonderland feeling for me as a writer. I am very, very small. I am very, very large. Take this pill and you shrink, and this pill and you become giant. And this is the way his mind works now.
So I have a drawing that I call relativity, and it's a way like when we're talking, especially to people who have no math skills and no interest in science, when we talk about relativity or parallel universes and ultimate realities, it sounds too weird to be real, and people have a hard time believing it. So I have a drawing that teaches it just like pi. And I use the Doppler effect, which a lot of people use, but then there's a couple questions at the end that I change that really makes it click home for the layman. So I always say, because a lot of people don't know what the Doppler effect is, so for those who don't, the Doppler effect is, the way sound waves stretch and compress, like imagine when you hear a car drive by you, it goes meow, and it changes pitch. And the reason why it changes pitch is as the car is approaching you, the sound wave is leaving the car, and a long wavelength is a low pitch, and a short wavelength we hear is a high pitch. And since the car is approaching us, that wave hits us more frequently, so it's like having a shorter wavelength, so we hear a higher pitch. And now the car moves past me, and it's moving away from me, and that wavelength stretches out and gets longer, and we hear a low pitch. But now we add relativity to it, and say the car is driving away from me and towards you. Well, since it's moving away from me, relative to my position, the sound waves are stretching out. I hear the pitch getting lower, but it's moving towards you, so relative to you, the waves are compressing. You hear a high pitch. The person in the car is traveling with it, so there's no Doppler effect for them. They hear a medium pitch. And then what you do right there is you stop and say, what sound is it making? The low pitch to me, the high pitch to you, or the medium pitch to the person in the car? And it's actually making all three sounds relative to who's looking at it. And then you say, which reality is the real one? All three are real, they're just relative. And then you take one more step and say, now imagine we have an infinite number of people all looking at that same car. Every person is moving at a different speed from 0 to the speed of light. Every single person hears a different sound, and every reality is different but valid. It's just relative. And that applies to everything. So that's the idea of relativity in a nutshell, and how everything is literally relative to the observer and the observed.
That made sense. Absolutely fascinating story, you two. Thanks very much for being here.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to everyone for listening.
That was Jason Padgett and Maureen Seaberg, the authors of Struck by Genius, How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel. We've linked to the book on our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. And we'll be back with Rochelle Saunders' interview with Adrian Owen about detecting awareness in vegetative patients after this.
Science for the People is a weekly radio show exploring everyday life from a scientific perspective. To find out where Science for the People airs near you, or to listen to past episodes, check out our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Google+, or to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Science for the People. I'm Rochelle Saunders. With me is Professor Adrian Owen. He is currently the Canada Excellence Research Chair in Cognitive Neuroscience and Imaging at Western University in Canada. His work combines structural and functional neuroimaging with neuropsychological studies of brain-injured patients. His most recent work has shown that functional neuroimaging can reveal conscious awareness in some patients who appear to be entirely vegetative, and may even allow some of these individuals to communicate with the outside world. Adrian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we should probably start by defining some terms. What do we mean when we say someone is in a vegetative state?
Well, a vegetative state is often referred to as a state of wakefulness without awareness. And that's because these patients will open their eyes. They'll often have what we call sleep-wake cycles. They'll go to sleep at night. They'll wake up during the day. They'll look around the room. They won't ever fixate on anything in particular, but the important thing is that they are animate. They're not like coma patients. And people often confuse vegetative state with coma. And a coma patient really will, to you and I, will look like they are asleep. But a vegetative patient will often look like they are awake. And in some senses, they have these rudimentary behaviors. The important point is, though, that they don't respond to any form of outside stimulation. If you're trying to attract their attention, they won't look in the direction of in your direction. Or if you try and ask them to raise an arm, they won't move at all. So they're entirely non-responsive. Yet they're in this curious state between being awake but seemingly completely unaware of their situation or the outside world.
And what about locked-in syndrome? What is that?
So locked-in syndrome is again a condition that's very often confused with the vegetative state, or at least the two conditions can present rather similarly. Locked-in patients have preserved cognitive functions, so mentally they are typically in very good shape. They're usually able to communicate by moving their eyes or by blinking their eyes, and that's typically how they are identified, how they are distinguished from vegetative state patients.
So what causes vegetative states and locked-in syndrome?
Well, that's a very difficult question. And actually, it's the reason why these conditions are so difficult to understand and so difficult to distinguish between. There are many different causes of all of these conditions. Typically, most of our patients will have been involved, will have had a traumatic brain injury. So that is some kind of blow to the head. And a typical patient will have been involved in a road traffic accident, either as a pedestrian hit by a car or as a driver or a passenger in a car. That's the most common form. Sporting injuries also often result in traumatic brain injuries. But there's a whole other class of brain injury that's non-traumatic, and it's typically the result of a loss of oxygen to the brain. So, for example, we see a fair number of patients who have been involved in so-called near-drowning incidents, where they've been underwater long enough to starve the brain of oxygen, but nevertheless the patient hasn't died. Similarly, skiing accidents aren't uncommon. People who end up being buried under avalanches, again, the brain is starved of oxygen for a prolonged period of time. And finally, cardiac arrest, heart attack can also produce a vegetative state. again, because of a loss of oxygen to the brain.
So it sounds like vegetative states and locked-in syndrome are actually quite medically similar, except that there's a difference in our ability to understand that person's awareness. So it sounds like locked-in syndrome, we know the person is aware, but vegetative states, we have either no idea or are fairly certain the person's not aware?
That question is absolutely central to my research program. What is the difference between a vegetative state patient and, say, a locked-in patient, and how can we tell that difference? And I guess more crucially, is it possible that some patients who appear to be vegetative are actually totally locked in? So like a typical locked-in patient, but not even able to move their eyes, not even able to blink to show us that they're there. And the way we've gone about this is by using forms of brain imaging, typically a form of MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, to try to see whether we can detect brain responses in some of our vegetative patients that would be indicative of some preserved level of awareness.
Can you walk us through some of the tests that you run and how they work?
I can, and perhaps the best way to set the stage for that is to tell you how it is that we detect awareness or consciousness, typically at the bedside. I'm sure everybody will have seen a medical documentary or a drama where a patient is asked to squeeze the doctor's hand if they can hear the instruction to do so, and that's an important clinical approach to assessing awareness, because if a patient is able to squeeze a hand in response to command, then you know that they understand spoken language. You know that they can turn that request into an action, albeit a simple action like squeezing a hand. But what if the patient was totally physically incapable of behaving in any way at all? So they couldn't squeeze a hand, or they couldn't blink an eye, couldn't move their eyes in any direction. So what we've done is we've used a type of functional brain imaging to see whether patients can make brain responses that are absolutely analogous to the hand squeezing. In a typical scenario, we'll ask the patient to imagine doing something, and the thing that we ask them to imagine doing is something that we know will activate a particular region of the brain. Our favorite task at the moment is to ask people to imagine that they're playing a game of tennis. And the reason for that is that if you imagine moving your arms around vigorously, as you would if you were really in the middle of a rally at Wimbledon, then you activate a part of the brain known as the premotor cortex. And this is it's right on the top and in the middle of the brain. And it's an area that is involved in setting up sequences of actions. It's not the area that actually creates those movements. It's the area that sets those movements up. So if you simply imagine that you're playing a game of tennis, the premotor cortex will reliably light up. So what we do is we put our patients who are assumed to be vegetative, they've got no physical responses, into the scanner, and we ask them to imagine they're playing a game of tennis. And if their premotor cortex lights up when we ask them to do that, following the logic that I've laid out about hand squeezing, we can conclude that they understood the command to imagine playing tennis, and they turned that into an action, albeit an action of their brain.
So how do you know for sure that what you're seeing in the scanner is actually an awareness at work rather than some kind of, reflex or false positive?
So that's a very good question. And it's one that I can only answer by telling you that obviously we are extremely conservative in the way that we try to understand these brain responses. So we spend a lot of time working with healthy participants in the scanner, working out how reliable these responses are. And I can tell you we've scanned hundreds and hundreds of healthy people imagining playing tennis in the scanner. And the activity in the premotor cortex that occurs as soon as you tell somebody to start doing that is just as reliable as getting healthy participants to squeeze your hand when you ask them to do it. That may seem rather odd to people, but this is a very simple brain response, a part of the motor system in the brain, and it's something that's incredibly reliable. Now, when we see this in a patient, of course, we can do a number of things to make sure it's indicative of awareness. We can look at when it happens. Does it happen exactly when we tell the patient to do it? Does it turn off when we tell the patient to stop imagine playing tennis? Can they do a variety of different tasks that we know are associated with activity in different brain regions? And we go through all of these things one at a time to make sure that essentially the patient's brain is responding in exactly the same way that a healthy participant's brain would respond. And that's how we're able to deduce that they are actually conscious. There is another way that we can know that a patient is conscious based on brain imaging, and that is to start asking them questions and getting them to use this method to give us the answers to those questions. So, for example, for some patients, we've asked questions and said, well, if the answer is yes, imagine playing tennis. And if the answer is no, do something completely different. And the great thing about this approach is we can ask them questions that we don't know the answers to, but that we can go and find out the answers to later. And obviously, if the patient is answering questions by changing their pattern of brain activity, and we are getting the correct answers to those questions, there can be no other explanation other than that the patient is conscious and is conveying that information. So in some senses, that's the ultimate test that the patient is actually conscious.
So based on the work that you've done and some of the presumed vegetative people that you've tested, what percentage of presumed vegetative people are actually showing signs of awareness based on your tests?
So that's a very difficult question to answer precisely, because the patients that we tend to see, I think, are often the difficult cases. So the numbers I'm going to tell you, I suspect are rather conservative. But of the patients that we see, we've conducted 2 group studies now, and about 1 in 5 of the patients who appear to be entirely vegetative. So by that I mean they make no responses at all to any form of external stimulation. About 1 in 5 of those people will be able to generate reliable brain responses when in the fMRI scanner.
So do we know, do we have some, I guess, anecdotal evidence that some people who have presumed to be in vegetative states have woken up and said that they were aware of what was happening around them?
Yeah, well, we certainly do. We have seen patients who not only have gone on to recover, but have been then able to report the experiences that they had while we had previously presumed them to be in a vegetative state. For example, patients who we scanned, and then many months later, they came back having experienced some recovery. And we need to be a little bit careful by how we talk about recovery here. It's extremely rare for patients in this condition to go on to lead a full independent life. But nevertheless, some of them do go on to improve significantly. And we've certainly seen patients who've done that and then been able to tell us what the experience was like of being scanned many months earlier when we put them through the MRI thinking that they were in a vegetative state.
Wow, this is really fascinating work, and it really brings forward the idea that some of these patients who are really very much trapped in their own body might someday be able to communicate with people in the outside world, even if it's just yes or no questions.
It does, and I mean, I think we're a way off that at the moment. I think it's very important that people realize that where we are right now is, I think we're getting pretty good at detecting these people. We have a number of methods for finding out who may appear to be in a vegetative state, but actually is in one of these completely locked-in situations. We're still working very hard, and we're some way off being able to reliably communicate with those individuals, or at least produce a system that they could use on a day-to-day basis for communicating. That's what we would really like to achieve in the mid to long term, and that's going to take quite a bit more work.
Does the diagnosis shift, the medical diagnosis shift between deciding someone's in a vegetative state to moving someone into being in a locked-in syndrome, does that change how they're treated or how people interact with those patients?
It certainly does. We now have almost 20 years experience of imaging these patients and detecting that some of them have residual cognitive functions. There's more going on there than was previously thought. And I can tell you that it almost always changes the way that the patients are treated, the way that people act around them, and I think that's entirely natural. I mean, the clinical, clinically, the way one is supposed to treat these patients is as though they understand what's going on around them, and one would always want to be careful not to have conversations in front of them that you wouldn't want them to hear. But nevertheless, I think it's human nature that after many years of a patient not responding, one might easily forget. And I'm sure many of these patients have experienced conversations that they may have not wanted to experience. So that is something that certainly changes in the case of our patients once it's established that they are actually aware.
So I was looking through some of the historical literature and also some articles that I found online, and it seemed like, especially in the 90s, there was a lot of resistance to some of your work and ideas surrounding this topic. Why was there so much resistance?
I think there's still a certain amount of resistance to it. I mean, I think in the beginning, the resistance was really, it was just so hard to believe that it could be true. I mean, I remember back in 97 when we did the first brain imaging study on a patient who was presumed to be vegetative. I mean, I was surprised as anybody else that we saw activity, and that particular patient responded to her brain responded to familiar pictures of her friends and family, and it just seemed unbelievable that there could be residual brain activity in a patient who'd presumed to be vegetative. And we went on to do, I think, even more extraordinary things, discovering that patients were fully conscious, communicating with some of these patients. I can completely understand why, if you don't necessarily completely understand the ins and outs of the science and the exactly what we did, it's almost too fantastic to believe. I think that sort of I think that resistance has subsided over the years because we've now demonstrated this again and again in many patients using different methods. So I think it's now generally accepted that these patients do exist and that we are able to detect them in these ways.
What are the next steps in your research?
I think a really big question is how many of these patients are there? This is, as I said to you previously, there are many things that can result in a vegetative state. And because of that, these patients end up in many different situations. Some are in care homes, some are in hospitals, some are being cared for at home by their own families. So it's very hard to get a definitive list or number of how many patients are out there. And by extension, it's very difficult for us to know how many conscious patients there might be. And I think people will be surprised when we finally get to the bottom of that, just how many of these patients there are. Another big question really is can we push this further to develop some technique for actually allowing reliable day-to-day communication between these patients and their families? And that's obviously an extremely important issue. I can't pretend that I don't lie awake at night occasionally thinking, well, it's great, I'm able to detect these patients. We were able to find out who's not in a vegetative state, but what then? What can we do? What can we do for them? And I would really like to be able to follow that up with some reliable method of communication that patients could even perhaps take home with them to allow them to communicate again. And I guess the third thing is therapy. I mean, people often say to us, well, this is great, you can detect these patients, but what are you going to do to fix them? And although that's not an area that I personally work in, I'm more concerned with working out who's not in a vegetative state and trying to make their lives as easy as possible. The work that we do certainly does feed in to potential therapies, to potential drugs, to potential types of perhaps surgery that may again, in the long term, assist some of these patients or improve their condition.
Do you think that some of your research also helps us learn a little bit more about what it is to be conscious or aware? Because I guess that's really the central question.
I think it does. And this is something that's sort of come out of the research in a slightly unexpected way, I think. One of the things that we've been able to do is to develop different ways of measuring consciousness that are relevant to the healthy brain as well. So some of our recent work has shown that some of the methods that we developed specifically to test consciousness in patients can actually tell us a little bit about what it means what it means for a healthy person to be conscious, and how does your consciousness differ from mine? I mean, looking at you in the brain scan, your brain in the scanner, and my brain in the scanner, doing some of our tasks can tell us a little bit about the what is similar about human consciousness. What are the main characteristics, and why is it that what is it that makes you and I both conscious, but say a patient who sustained a serious brain injury non-conscious?
Adrian, thanks so much for being here. Your work is really fascinating.
Thank you very much for having me.
If you want to learn more about Adrian Owen and his work, you can visit owenlab.uwo.ca, a link which we'll include in our show notes for this episode. And you can find those show notes on our website at scienceforthepeople.ca. You can also, of course, find us on our Twitter feed and our Facebook page, where we post news related to our shows and where you can send us a message, leave a comment, or chat with other people about the show. And of course, you can always find us on iTunes, where you can subscribe to have new episodes delivered directly to your computer, phone, or tablet. You can also access all our previous episodes. And if you're really keen, we'd love it if you'd leave a rating and review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Science for the People.
Science for the People is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta. The show is produced by Rochelle Saunders. Ryan Bromsgrove is our promotions manager. Our social media manager is Chelsea Butler. K.O. Myers updates our website. Helen Quivalon is our publishing liaison. Ed Haynes is our guest coordinator. We get research help from Josh Whitten. The show is edited by K.O. Myers and Ryan Bromsgrove. Our theme song was written and recorded by Fractal Pattern, and its title is Binary Consequence. The show is hosted by Rochelle Saunders, Marie Claire Shanahan, and me, Desiree Schell.